Angela Carter, a distinguished leader in national security, was on her way home after a long day at a successful conference. As the deputy director of the CIA, she had just delivered a speech that had earned praise from city officials and top leaders. The event, hosted by Mayor Jonathan Mitchell, was a major achievement for her, but now all she craved was a peaceful drive home. The night was quiet, the road empty, except for her black SUV gliding smoothly through the dimly lit streets. Angela's mind wandered to upcoming projects, the future of national security, and how much more there was to accomplish. It was past 9 p.m. and the streetlights flickered as her car's headlights cut through the darkness. Suddenly, the red and blue lights of a police car flashed in her rearview mirror. A short siren echoed in the night. Angela's brow furrowed. She wasn't speeding or breaking any laws, so why were the police pulling her over? She slowed her car and activated the hazard lights. The last thing she wanted was any trouble, but she had learned long ago to trust her instincts. Something about this didn't feel right. Two officers got out of the patrol car. Both were white men, and they walked toward her car without any sense of urgency. The taller officer, with a hard expression, approached her window and tapped on it with an almost deliberate defiance. Angela didn't flinch. She rolled down the window, keeping her voice steady and calm. "Good evening, gentlemen. What seems to be the issue?" The officer's gaze was dismissive as he scanned Angela with clear disdain. His voice was rough when he spoke. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone aggressive, offering no explanation for the stop. Angela's surprise was evident. She knew her rights. The law required police officers to provide a clear reason for pulling someone over. However, she didn't want to escalate the situation. She calmly reached into her bag, retrieved the requested documents, and handed them over. The officer took them without a word of thanks, then turned and walked back to the patrol car. Angela sat quietly, trying to remain composed, but her instincts told her something wasn't right. She watched through the rearview mirror as the second officer, shorter and with a more suspicious look, began walking toward her. Her unease grew. What was going on? Why this sudden, unwarranted stop? Angela remained calm, her eyes narrowing slightly, as the second officer stood by her car, arms crossed, studying her with a sharp gaze. His demeanor was cold, searching her every move like he was waiting for something to go wrong. He took in every detail of her appearance, his eyes lingering on the sleek black SUV, and then he smirked. "Nice car," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "Must have cost a pretty penny." Angela's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but she didn't let her voice waver. She had faced prejudice before, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. She took a deep breath and replied, her tone even. "My car is perfectly legal. I don't think I did anything wrong to warrant a stop." The officer shrugged dismissively. "We'll decide whether you're wrong or not. Just sit tight." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment she felt a rush of anger rise within her. But she fought it down. As a woman of color, she had become all too familiar with being underestimated, judged by others simply because of her skin. That didn't make it easier to endure, but she had learned to keep her composure. She reminded herself to stay calm. This wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger. Through the rearview mirror, Angela watched the first officer idly flip through her documents in the patrol car, his movements slow and unhurried. Every so often, he exchanged words with his partner, their laughter filling the air. Angela knew this was no simple traffic stop. It was a blatant display of power. After a few minutes, the first officer returned to her car, tossing her papers back at her with a mocking expression. "Everything looks fine," he muttered, "but you need to cooperate a little more." Angela's frown deepened. "More cooperation? What do you mean?" The second officer stepped closer, his hand resting ominously on his waistband, as though preparing for something more. "We want to search your car," he declared flatly. Angela's heart skipped a beat. She was stunned by the audacity of the request. "Search my car. I have no contraband and you don't have a warrant. I refuse," she said, her voice steady but firm. The first officer's expression hardened. "You have no right to refuse," he retorted, his eyes challenging her. "We are the police. When we ask you, you must obey." Angela's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. She had faced dangerous situations countless times during her career, and now was no different. She knew how to keep her emotions in check. Her voice didn't waver as she responded, "You have no right to search my car without a warrant. This is a violation of my civil rights." The two officers exchanged surprised glances, but it was only a moment before their expressions turned to mockery. Angela knew she was standing on the edge of a fight, one that could escalate quickly. But she wasn't alone. The hidden camera in her car was recording everything, and she knew she had the power of the truth on her side. The second officer's voice dripped with malice as he leaned closer, his words sharp and venomous. "Listen, miss," he sneered. "Don't make this difficult. Don't think you're anyone important to us. You're just a black woman in a nice car." His words struck Angela like a knife aimed straight at her pride. But she didn't flinch. She kept her expression unreadable, her hands resting firmly on the steering wheel. Her voice was steady, calm. "If you don't give me a valid reason, I have the right to refuse, and I advise you to think carefully before continuing to violate my rights." The air between them thickened with tension. One of the officers took a step back and exchanged a glance with his partner. They began to mutter quietly, plotting their next move. Angela's instincts screamed at her to prepare for whatever was about to come. She knew this wasn't just about her car. It was about much more. She sat upright, her posture rigid and determined. The flashing lights of the police car painted her face in red and blue, but her expression remained calm, unwavering. This was more than a professional challenge now. It was a personal affront, a reminder of the bias she fought against every day. Yet she refused to let it break her. The first officer moved forward, his boots stomping against the pavement as he knocked sharply on the hood of Angela's car. The sound was loud, commanding. "Get out," he ordered, his tone cold. Feeling the tension in the air, Angela opened the door and stepped out. The elegant black suit she wore only emphasized her authority and confidence, but the two officers only met her presence with contempt. To them, she was nothing more than a target for their prejudice. They couldn't fathom a woman of color standing her ground, especially one who had earned the position of deputy director of the CIA. The second officer's hand hovered near his gun as he gave his command. "We're going to search your car." Angela's jaw tightened. "I've made it clear you don't have a search warrant, and I do not consent. This is an abuse of power. Who do you think you are to lecture us?" The first officer stepped closer, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he towered over her. "Listen, miss, you should be reasonable and cooperate. You don't want us to make things more difficult for you, do you?" Angela's chest tightened, a surge of anger rising within her, but she knew better than to let it show. Her emotions in this moment could become her enemy. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. "I have nothing to hide," she replied, her voice calm but resolute. "But I have the right to defend myself against abuse of power. Your actions are not only wrong, they're a violation of my civil rights." The second officer let out a cruel laugh, his face twisted in derision. "Civil rights? You think you're a lawyer or a politician?" he mocked. Angela didn't respond. Instead, she simply touched the hidden button on the dashboard that activated the recording device in the car. The truth would speak for itself, and she wouldn't let them get away with this. Angela's wrist remained steady, her fingers brushing against the small device hidden beneath her sleeve. It was a watch that controlled the second hidden camera in her car, ensuring that every word and action would be clearly recorded as evidence. She knew this was not just about her own rights anymore. This was about accountability. Every detail would be preserved, and she had the truth on her side. The first officer's voice cut through the tense silence as he stepped closer, his anger simmering. "Don't make me use force," he shouted, his tone threatening. Angela's expression hardened, but she kept her voice calm, unwavering. "I advise you to think carefully. Continuing these wrong actions will lead to serious consequences." The second officer, his rage palpable, sneered at her. "Are you trying to scare us?" he yelled. "Listen, you're just a black woman in a fancy car. That doesn't mean you can fool us. Who do you think you are?" Angela's fists clenched at her sides, her body shaking with the weight of humiliation. But she refused to let it show. Instead of responding with anger, she took a deep breath and stood tall. "I'll say this for the last time," she warned, her voice cutting through the tension. "You are violating my rights, and this action will affect not only you, but also your careers." The second officer laughed, a cruel sound that filled the air. But his mocking smile faded when he noticed his partner growing impatient, clearly losing his own temper. "Okay, if you don't cooperate, we'll do it our way," the first officer said, his voice cold and threatening. He moved toward her car, preparing to search it. Without hesitation, Angela blocked his path, her voice sharp and unwavering. "If you touch my car without a warrant, you will be held responsible before the law." Her words hit the officers like a slap, momentarily halting them in their tracks. But instead of stepping back, the first officer's expression twisted with anger. Without warning, he pulled out his gun and pointed it directly at Angela. "You think you can order us around?" he shouted. "Remember who has the power here." The sight of the gun trained on her caused Angela's heart to race, but her face remained stoic. She raised her hands, her eyes locked onto the weapon, not allowing her fear to show. "Put the gun down," she said firmly. "Not only is this against the law, but it puts you in a position from which you cannot return." The second officer, seizing the moment, swung open her car door with a smug grin on his face. Angela, however, remained calm, her movements deliberate, as she slowly reached for her phone. She dialed Mayor Jonathan Mitchell's number, keeping her voice steady despite the intensity of the situation. "Sir, I have a problem with 2 police officers in the city," she said, her tone businesslike but urgent. "I need your immediate intervention. The location is 13A Street. The mayor, though clearly surprised, recognized the gravity in her voice. "I'll be there shortly," he replied. "Stay safe and don't escalate the situation." Angela nodded, never breaking eye contact with the gun that was still aimed at her. Her calmness was her greatest weapon, and she knew it would see her through. The second officer smirked, his arrogance in full force. "Who did you just call? Your accomplice? Let's see who a person like you can call," he taunted. Angela didn't respond. Instead, she stared at him coldly, letting the silence speak for itself. The minutes dragged on like hours, the weight of every second heavy in the air. She could feel the mockery in their eyes, but deep down, she knew the truth would soon be revealed. And when it did, it would be clear who the real threat was. As the mayor's car lights appeared at the end of the street, Angela could feel the change in the air. A strange aura permeated the atmosphere, shifting the tension. The officer holding the gun flinched, his eyes filled with confusion as he noticed the luxury SUV approaching, followed closely by the sheriff's car. "What? Who invited them?" the officer muttered, his voice now lacking the same confidence it had just moments before. Angela remained calm, her heart steady, though the situation was still fraught with danger. She knew the tide was turning, and soon the balance of power would shift. Mayor Jonathan Mitchell was the first to step out of his car. His tall, commanding presence seemed to fill the air, and without saying a word, he walked toward the scene, his sharp eyes fixed on the two policemen. Sheriff David Carter, a man known for his unwavering dedication to justice, followed closely behind. His face, stern as if carved from stone, spoke volumes of the authority he carried. He was not a man who tolerated any wrongdoing, especially not from his own. "What the hell is going on here?" Mayor Mitchell's voice rang out, sharp and demanding, cutting through the deadly silence. The two officers exchanged confused looks, their earlier bravado now replaced by uncertainty. The officer holding the gun lowered his hand, but he kept the weapon in his grip, as if reluctant to relinquish the last bit of power he had. "Mr. Mayor," he stammered, "we're on a mission to check on a suspicious subject." "Suspicious?" Mayor Mitchell's voice cut through the air, his eyes now fixed on the officer. "You just pointed a gun at one of the most important people in this country, and you dare call her a suspicious person?" The two officers stood frozen, their faces showing shock and fear. The mayor's words were like a bomb exploding in their minds, completely disorienting them. They glanced nervously at Angela, now realizing the enormity of their mistake. "Who is she?" the second officer asked hesitantly, his voice hoarse. Jonathan Mitchell's anger was evident as he spoke, his voice dripping with authority. "Allow me to introduce you," he said, his eyes cold. "This is Angela Carter, Deputy Director of the CIA, who has just finished an important conference that I personally invited her to." The two officers paled at the revelation. The weight of their actions now crashed down on them. The officer holding the gun took a step back, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Chief David Carter, his eyes burning with fury, stepped forward. "What did you two just do?" he demanded, his voice filled with righteous anger. "Who gave you the right to abuse your power, insult, and threaten an innocent citizen? Not to mention point a gun at her." We didn't know," the first officer stammered, but his sentence was cut off by Angela's sharp voice. "You didn't know?" she said, her words cutting like a blade. "You didn't know who I am, but that doesn't give you the right to insult me, to be racist, or to abuse your power. Citizenship is not based on status or position. Today you crossed all the lines." Chief David Carter turned to Angela, his voice softening but still carrying the weight of authority. "You're right, Angela. This will not go unanswered." The tension in the air was still thick, but Angela's gaze never left the two officers, standing in front of her. The mayor's words, though filled with indignation, were clear. These men would be held accountable. Angela pressed a button on her smartwatch, turning off the hidden camera that had recorded every detail of the incident. "Their entire actions and words were recorded," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I will turn this video over to Internal Affairs." Mayor Jonathan Mitchell turned to Sheriff David Carter, his anger now directed at the officers. "I want these two men suspended immediately," he ordered, his voice filled with authority. "I will personally oversee this investigation. No one has the right to act like this, especially while wearing a police uniform." Sheriff Carter nodded, his face grim as he turned to the two policemen. "You heard him," he said. "You are suspended immediately. Turn in your badges and guns now." The officer holding the gun hesitated, but when he saw the fury in the police chief's eyes, he reluctantly removed his belt and placed the gun on the hood of the car. The other officer followed suit, lowering his head, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Angela stood there, watching the two men as they complied. There was a sense of relief, but it was overshadowed by a bitter truth. She knew that this was only one small victory in a much larger battle, a battle against the deep-seated injustice that many people of color faced every day. But for today, justice had been served. Mayor Jonathan Mitchell placed a hand gently on Angela's shoulder, his voice softening with sympathy. "Angela, I'm sorry for what you've been through. This city doesn't deserve people like them on its police force. I'll make sure they get what they deserve." Angela nodded, her voice filled with determination. "Thank you, sir. But I don't just want them punished. I want to make sure no one else has to go through this again. The system needs to change, and people like us have a responsibility to make sure it does." Jonathan Mitchell's expression hardened with resolve. "You're right. We will do whatever it takes to change this." Angela turned to look back at the two policemen, now standing with their heads bowed, defeated and silent by the side of the road. She said nothing more, but her eyes spoke volumes, disappointment in their actions, yet a fierce determination to not let this be the end. The fight for justice had only just begun. Chief David Carter signaled to his two waiting colleagues to take the officers away. As the two policemen were escorted to their car, Angela remained still, watching them fade into the distance. The flickering lights of the police cars cast long shadows on the ground, but within Angela, the fire for justice burned brighter than ever. The public response to the incident was overwhelming. The image of a police officer pointing a gun at Angela, a woman of color in the middle of the night on a deserted street, quickly became a powerful symbol of the systemic injustice that many people faced daily. The viral video spread across social media, news outlets, and even caught the attention of celebrities who spoke out in support of Angela and denounced the officer's actions. Thousands of people, from ordinary citizens to influential public figures, rallied behind Angela. It wasn't just because of her position as the deputy director of the CIA, but because of her bravery in confronting this injustice head-on and ensuring that the truth came to light. People were inspired by her resolve and her refusal to back down in the face of abuse of power. Within days of the incident, an internal investigation team had completed a thorough report. Their findings were damning. The two officers involved, Daniel Cooper and Brian Harris, had not only abused their authority, but had also violated multiple codes of conduct set by the police department. As a result, both men were terminated from their positions. Daniel Cooper, the officer who had wielded the gun, faced criminal charges for abuse of power, threatening with a weapon, and racial profiling. During the trial, his defense attorney tried to argue that Cooper had merely been doing his job and had felt threatened. However, Angela's video footage was irrefutable evidence that the situation had been entirely unjustified. The court found Cooper guilty and sentenced him to 6 years in prison, stripping him of all his rights and titles within the police force. Brian Harris, the second officer, was charged with complicity, assault, and abuse of power. While he hadn't directly used a weapon, his role in illegally searching the vehicle and making discriminatory statements had caused significant harm. His actions, though less violent, were no less damaging. Harris was sentenced to 2 years in prison for his actions, a reminder that even those who stand by and allow injustice to happen must also be held accountable. Mayor Jonathan Mitchell and Police Chief David Carter called for a public press conference to address the incident and to formally apologize to Angela and the community. "We apologize for the unacceptable actions of 2 of our officers," Mayor Mitchell said, his voice firm. "This city is committed to zero tolerance for racism or abuse of power. We will work to improve our system and ensure that justice is served fairly for everyone, regardless of their background." Angela, standing beside them, attended the press conference. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't hold back. "This incident is not just a personal issue," she said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "This is a wake-up call for the entire system. There will be no more silence. No more ignoring the voices of those who have suffered under systemic racism. We must do better. We will do better." Her words struck a chord with the public. People knew that this wasn't just about one wrongful encounter. It was about the bigger issue of systemic racism and abuse of power within law enforcement. The changes Angela demanded were not just for her own healing, but for every person who had faced similar prejudice and oppression. The press conference ended, but the conversation was far from over. The fight for justice continued, fueled by Angela's unyielding commitment to change. It became clear that her story was just one chapter in a larger movement, one that was determined to confront the injustices that had long been allowed to fester. Angela's encounter that night wasn't just a fight for her own dignity. It was a catalyst for something much larger. She knew that if the system wasn't addressed in its entirety, things would only continue to repeat. Justice, she believed, wasn't just about punishing the wrongdoers, but about ensuring that such injustice never happened again. In the wake of the scandal, Police Chief David Carter announced a series of sweeping reforms aimed at tackling abuse of power and racism within the force. These reforms were designed to change the culture of the police department and make sure that incidents like the one Angela faced would never occur again. For Angela, this was more than just a personal victory. It was a motivation to continue pushing for justice, to use her platform to inspire change. She participated in numerous forums and conferences, advocating for justice reform and calling on others to join in the fight for a fairer, more equitable system. Angela's story became a reminder of the injustices still present in society, but it also showcased the power of one individual's courage to confront those injustices. Her resilience and determination to stand up for what was right became a beacon of hope for others, and it inspired thousands to take action and stand up for their rights. Her story ignited a movement for justice, reminding people that change is possible when we refuse to stay silent.